Let's go in the talking room.
So, thanks for joining me in the talking room.
Oh, happy to be here.
Tell me what the state of your world is like right now.
Oh man, it's never settled. It's always in flux. Um, so we just finished Toronto and Sydney in the past, opening up restaurants past year and a half, and
What kind of lead time does that take?
Toronto came to us about 2.5 years ago. Sydney came to us 3 years ago. So there's a 6 month difference. So we opened up Sydney a year and a half ago, and we opened up Toronto last October, which was by far the most. Both were extraordinarily difficult. Sydney, obviously, because of the distance, it looks very close on a map. It does, and
Yeah.
that's what I continue to look at. Like I'll look on my iPad and look at the time difference, and be like, oh, it's only like that far away.
It is all the way
It's
across
so
the world
far
from
away.
New York.
It's so far away, and I spent many months there, and many months in Toronto, and getting that open. And I feel that it took several years off my life, just because it was really opening a restaurant is very tough. And then getting Lucky Peach, the magazine, running. Pete and I are trying to work on different cookbooks, spending more time at the restaurants in New York because I've been spending so much time abroad. So I've been spending a lot of time at Noodle Bar recently. We moved our culinary lab to Brooklyn, where we're making different types of misos aren't the right word because miso means that it's soybean based, and we're making it out of different nuts and legumes and stuff.
Now, that R&D lab, is that something that you've always had?
We've had that for 3 years now, and it's just through a series of accidents, it's basically shifted into a lab of mostly fermentation. It didn't have a focus, and now we just sort of ferment anything we can and trying to take that to a commercial level. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're growing. So I'm just trying to do that and carve out what I've realized is important, a personal life on top of that. So it's been a lot.
What kind of challenges are you finding in managing all these different projects? I mean, what's the most difficult part of any of these endeavors, I imagine, is the staffing.
Staffing is hard. It's really hard. I just had a call this morning about another project, and I'm lucky enough that we're always sort of in talks for different projects, cool projects that, I mean,
You want to do everything.
we want to do everything, and that's the hardest thing, is learning how to say no.
Yeah.
And because every time we do something, it has to be a home run.
And figuring out if something's both within your purview and something that you can knock it out and learn something.
Exactly. And is it going to be creatively challenging and fun? Will we learn something? Will it benefit the company as a whole? Because we have, by the end of the year, we'll be plus 700 employees. Wow. So we make a decision, and it's hard because I think that when we make our best decisions is when we are not as calculating, but we don't have so much to lose. And now we're this slow, plotting.
There's a bureaucracy.
Yeah, and I'm like, we're having meetings to have meetings. And that's when I'm like, what the hell's going on?
The meetings come.
And part of those meetings is so much about staff and human resource and how are we going to develop a system and talent. And
Do you get a certain amount of better access to talent because you're David Chang, or do you have a higher signal to noise ratio because you're David Chang?
I don't know. I think there's a dearth of talent across the board.
Right.
And I don't understand if that's because of the cooking schools or because, cooking's not like a white collar profession. All I know is that all of my friends, everyone could use one or two more cooks.
Do you guys have a mutual agreement not to poach from each other?
No, we get poached all the time.
Okay.
There needs to be some solidarity. It's more difficult now, and I don't know if it's because the millennial generation's coming and they're 18, 19 years old. I literally had a kid come up to me last week, and I sort of dressed him down. I'm trying not to lose my temper. That's been the biggest thing. I can't. I do have a bad temper, and I've learned that it's, while beneficial for me in the past, is not really good for me in the future. And Mario Batali told me once, like, dude, if you yell, it just means that you're insecure about your own issues. And I was like, whatever. And now I'm like, oh man, he's right.
Do you know, one of the things I took from John Belushi, he was showing Steve Martin. He was showing Steve Martin around the set of Saturday Night Live in the mid '70s, and he said, "I never yell at the staff. I only yell at the executives."
It's true.
I love that. To me, that's a great axiom to follow.
And I'm learning. I'm learning, and that's hard. And I've realized that I don't think you can be a non-yeller before you be a yeller. You have to be a yeller first, and then become a non-yeller.
Do you think? Because when you say there's a dearth of talent, I mean, I find when we've got to hire people in the shop that it's hard to find people who have the skills, but more importantly, the attitude and the willingness to just kick ass.
100%. I talk to editors of magazines or just any industry, and it seems that the biggest complaint is like, well, they just don't want to work like we used to, and I realize it's not their fault. So it's not their fault they were born in 1995 or
Right.
4 or wherever.
Well, there's a theory that everyone being, their special snowflake in our educational system has made people feel totally entitled. Yes. I mean, I know that I felt entitled when I was 17 or 18. I was an unsufferable little shit. And it took me until I was like 25 before I knew how to work hard. And then once I did, I was shocked at myself.
Yes.
Once I knew how to really kick ass.
But I was always I agree, and I think it was also the fear that like I'm going to get the shit beaten out of me, or this is the only way to do it. Maybe that's why I gravitated towards like kitchens that were really difficult and hard.
Right.
Because that's what I needed personally, and that's how I learned.
Yeah.
But like cooks today, they just, for the most part, there are some cooks that stand out for the sole reason that they just want to learn, and they're a sponge and they'll do whatever it takes. But like I had this guy, and he's like, well, he actually said this. I dressed this kid down for a mistake he made. I didn't even yell at him. He's like, dude. First he calls me dude.
Yeah.
And he's like, do you know what decade it is, man? It's 2013. You can't talk to people like that. I was
kid
like,
says this?
yeah, I'm sort of in awe of what just happened. Needless to say, he's moving on, but I was shocked that was the first response.
Right. Not taking some responsibility.
And yeah, the difference is, I think, in somewhere, like I'm like turning 36, but like I was talking to a couple other chef friends that were near the same age. Like we were sort of just were we saw what it was like, almost old school cooking, and it's different. Like we felt lucky to be part of a kitchen.
Right.
We felt every day like maybe chef's going to fire us and replace us.
Right.
Now, today's cook feels that the restaurant's lucky to have them.
And soon they'll have their own cooking show. Do you think that that's part of the other thing, the entitlement, that there's so many celebrity chefs now? I mean, that's definitely new in the last 15 years.
I'm viewing it like a .com. Right. When it happened, like you get like tubesocks.com and it was like IPO, whatever. Yeah. I think that eventually the culinary world's sort of in a bubble, and people are going to realize that you just can't finance a culinary school grad and give them an executive chef title with no experience whatsoever.
No. Even if he makes good food.
Even if he makes good food. So I'm sort of in conflict. It's great that you see this youth movement. It's fresh, new ideas are coming, but I'm torn because there's no respect for tradition. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting to hear you say that, because, I mean, your history also includes not following a traditional path.
But it's not, the only reason I took the path that I took is because I never fit into, if I could have been a part of the tradition, I would have taken the traditional path. I just always thought that I was outside looking in.
Right.
My own insecurity on that. So at my core, I'm like a classicist. I love the old school, but it's only because I feel that I can't embrace it because I can't be part of it.
But can you put that structure in the restaurants that you open?
It's hard because people don't know and they don't question food and they don't love food. I think they're the same. Like the best way I can describe it is, I remember cooks coming back in like 1999 or 2000, coming back from Talivant or working for Passard or who's the chef at Arpege. And this is sort of, I guess there's internet, but we weren't using the internet.
Right.
You heard stories. This is what the kitchen's like, and they were cooking like this, and they're hanging the birds this way, and you got to slice it this way, the temperature's this way, use this vinegar, whatever. You were sharing stories like baseball cards. It was awesome. Like, oh, this guy's coming back from Ducasse. Like, all he talked about at working at Monaco and Lucan was cleaning.
Right.
You know, and you're like, what? And that's how you learned. It was about this passion, this story, this craft that you just couldn't quite fathom because you didn't see a picture and you were relying on somebody else's words, whether it be a letter or they came back for a break or whatever. And I remember in 2000, my partner Caroline, who does cheese now, she had just come back from from eating at LBE. And I had heard of the restaurant. In '99, I worked at Mercy Kitchen. There was a guy named David who came back, and he said something. I just was like, that just sounds ridiculous. That's not cooking. Cooking to me was making veal stock and demi-glaze and all this stuff. Hardcore French, back-breaking labor, that's it.
Yeah.
Like hot and cold pea soup, no thank you. That's not cooking. And she's, I hear more and more, and then this person, Caroline, who was teaching me her station, was just effusive in praise about this place, and I just couldn't grasp it. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Because you like this restaurant so much, I don't know if I respect your judgment anymore, because it just was completely different to anything I thought that great food was about. Great food for me at that time, the paradigm still was of the Talivant model, or Bocuse, like very hardcore old school French. Yeah. But that's because I didn't know it. And if somebody came back now, today, and was like, hey, I went to LBE, it's awesome. They could just go online and there's probably 100 million photos of the past 25 years of LBE. Yeah. There's no more imagination, or there's no more conflict of trying to understand what it's about.
Could it be true that what you're talking about is that in order to parse and use the information that you were getting through that network, you had to actually solve a bunch of problems along the way? Right? You had to figure out and translate what someone was saying. They might have gotten a small amount name of the vinegar wrong, or they might have misunderstood how something happened, and you had to figure that out when you were absorbing that information.
Absolutely. I think that there was that struggle along the way, and then you learn it. It fills in that gap. And
once you've solved, because once you could hear information and you can kind of understand it, but once you've heard information that you've had to really break down by failing at it and screwing it up and getting it right, then you know it in a way that you know it deeply. You know it in your body.
Yeah, and that's why I don't blame the kids that are coming up now. It's not their fault. They have probably more culinary knowledge than ever before. They know every dish from every restaurant, who's doing what, techniques, whatever. But it's like that scene in Good Will Hunting or something where he's like, basically dresses down Matt Damon. He's like, you don't know love. You know everything about Shakespeare, you know everything about war, but you've never been to war. You never. Yeah. And that's the way I sort of feel about this, or even myself. Like, I'm getting engaged, or I'm engaged now, and like, I made fun of all my friends for years, yeah, thinking that I knew. Yeah. But it's like really different now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, this is just that information gap that I'm filling in, and it's sometimes great, sometimes not so great. And that entire process, I feel, is being skipped over. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's good or bad.
Well, but this is also something that people don't often talk about, which is there's a lot of tremendously deep and detailed culinary knowledge out there right now, but making food taste good is not the hardest part of the job in running a restaurant. It's an engineering challenge on a personnel front, on keeping food tasting, having it come out to the table fresh times 400 meals a night. That's much more difficult than people realize, I think.
Right. That is, making delicious food is the number one, should be. It's funny, that gets lost in opening a restaurant. It's like, what's your number one goal? To make the customer delicious food.
Right.
Somehow that gets lost. It's like, let's make the most authentic food. It doesn't matter. But running a restaurant is almost impossible because you got to give all of these chores and checklists. But it's a daily struggle. And
so when you say you guys are like, you have projects coming in and you're making decisions, do you have a central core team that you work with that helps you make those decisions? Are you the one who makes all the final decisions, or is it
It is a tour. I'm. This is my revelation, or my confession, I should say. I've always wanted to be an NFL coach.
Right. Yeah.
My entire life.
Fascinating.
And my one regret is like I went to Trinity College. I was supposed to play like football there, but I didn't because I enjoyed drinking beer too much and other things. And I was like, I'm not going to play D3. This is ridiculous. Had I played college football, I probably would have been like a film intern for like Belichick, and who knows where my career would be, right? But I think it's the closest thing. So I going back to football and cooking, I feel that that's how our organization has to be like. It's like a really well-run football team.
Right.
And you have offensive coordinators, you have defensive coordinators, special teams coach, and that's sort of the team. You have people that, you have a salary cap specialist that does the office stuff. It's very much how I can process being in a corporate environment because it's just something that I'm allergic to. But I understand that it's not just necessary, it helps us facilitate getting delicious food at the end of the day to the customer. So we parcel out all of these tasks to different people, and it's a work in progress.
I have to say, I find in the projects that Jamie and I do, figuring out how to take stuff on and be able to delegate to people you trust and admire, hopefully, is one of the most difficult tasks. Because not only, I mean, you want to do everything. I mean, that's the other problem, right? You want to roll up your sleeves and get in there and solve all the problems yourself, right?
Yes. But at a certain point, I think then you realize, is my time better spent for the greater good of the team doing something else? And that's the hard part. And I think that's why you see a lot of, how should I say, I think I've worked with a lot of great chefs, and sometimes I always laugh at the good fortune and luck that's been bestowed upon me because I think I'm in a position that I just shouldn't be in. I constantly feel like that. And I've worked with so many great cooks and chefs, but sometimes they just, the best cooks never translate to being the best chef. More often than not, it doesn't. And the best way I can think about it is because I live in a world of sports analogies. I heard a story about Chris Mullin when he was the great basketball player.
Yeah.
He was on the Pacers and Larry Bird was coaching them. And you got Chris Mullin, Reggie Miller, two of the best shooters of all time. Larry Bird's recently retired, and he's still better than all the players.
Right.
And so Larry Bird's there just being like, why can't you hit the shot? And he's just hitting shot after shot after shot right in front of these guys. And these are the team captains, and they're embarrassed. And he can't explain to them through coaching methods how to do what he can do. And I find that in cooking, like there's one cook that I know, and if he sees this, he'll know exactly who who it is about. I say, you're so good. He's one of my chef de cuisines. He's such a gifted cook that he has a hard time translating it to the other cooks. Like, do what I do.
And that's what a chef has to do.
And now I told him the best way you can do it. I think this is the same in any industry. If somebody says, yes, I understand, never assume that they understand.
Right.
You know, and I think the only way there has to be some reciprocity. Be like, don't say yes. If you say yes, I'm going to hold you accountable when you fuck it up. And you can say, no, I don't understand. As long as you need to, just let me know when. And when you do know when, you're going to teach me how to make this dish.
Right.
So there has to be a level of accountability. So it's a give and take. So with the new generation of cooks, like, we have to adapt our strategies and how we're teaching. And that's what I was telling, the chef. I was like, listen, just because you're telling them and you show them exactly how it's done doesn't mean that they've processed any of the information. I said to the chef, like, you just got to show them how to do it, and you can't assume that they can do what you can do.
I was always surprised. Like, I would show somebody, here's what I want you to do. I lay these out like this, weld here. It should take you about an hour. And I feel like I've given every parameter you need. I've actually stacked the pieces the way you need. I come back 6 hours later and it's not done. And I'm like, has everyone lost their minds? And it's true. You can't just show someone and say, here's how long it should take, here's how to do it. There's some other bit of translation that has to be done.
It's really difficult.
So where do you find, I would imagine that the creatively rewarding part of your job 7 years ago is very different than what it is now. Has it changed?
It's changed so much. Creatively speaking, I think that Like now, when I go out to eat, there's very few times where I don't know how they make it now, and it's or I don't criticize it, being like, you know what, I can make that better. Or even if I don't know how to do it, I was like, give me enough time, and I think I can improve this dish.
Are you always thinking that way?
I'm always thinking that way. It's constantly criticizing, and it's terrible.
It's funny. I was having dinner with Tracy Desjardins, and I asked her, we were eating some food. I said, do you run through a checklist of ingredients in your head? She's, oh, God, no. She's like, I couldn't live if I did that. It's too much information. She's like, I have to go off duty.
I can't do that.
Wow.
And it sucks. Which is why I actually stopped going out to eat for the most part. Because it's just not fun. It's like work all the time.
Right. But I mean, I also imagine that most of the time you go out to eat, everyone wants to really impress you too.
And that's, yeah, which is such a strange phenomenon.
I have a friend who insists on going to a fancy restaurant with me 3 times a year because he wants to. He's like, I love it when they send out that extra cheese plate for you, man. I want that treatment.
You know, I never understood it. There was a very, very, very famous chef, and I just thought it was very rude of him when he would say, you know, he'd call in before, he's like, don't send me. He'd have somebody else call and say, don't send him any food. And I'd be like, why not? Like, I want to kill this guy with food. And that was exactly it. You're killing him. And after a while, imagine going to every restaurant and never being able to order what you want. Sometimes you just want a salad.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And it just creates awkward position. And, you know, very thankful for that. But going back to the creative process, it's, I think there's something to be said when you don't know enough. And now that I feel that I know more about gastronomy than ever before, I still realize that I know nothing about gastronomy. But I think I know too much, not too much, but the more knowledge I gain, the less creative I become, I think, in a way.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, you're also exerting some creative influence on the machine that you are creating too, right? I mean, there is that, you're pointing it in a direction. Do you have a guide, a compass point in your head to compare new projects to that tells you if it fits in, or is it more of a gut feeling?
It's a little bit of both. The goal when you make a dish is it bulletproof? Where, with the exception of people that can't eat it, even if they hate the dish, they leave loving that dish because of the respect that went into it.
Right.
And that's what I consider a bulletproof dish, where 99.9% of the people are gonna be like, well, that's the most fucking amazing thing I've ever had. The few people that won't like it for reasons where they still respect it.
Right.
And that's how we sort of reverse engineer the project. Some people work with a technique and then they get to the final goal. The only goal we have as a restaurant or as a chef is, we know the only thing you can guarantee in terms of a restaurant experience is how the diner is going to leave in terms of feeling. They're either going to be pissed off,
right,
they're going to be okay with the meal, or they're going to be elated. We're always shooting for the feeling of elation. And how do you get to that? And somehow that guides the creative process. And more and more now, the creative process is thinking about flavors that most people consider trash or overlooked. And I wouldn't say it's like Moneyball.
What's that?
I wouldn't say it's like the Moneyball of flavor,
right,
but it's finding
the
value.
No one's paying attention to.
It's finding the flavor that no one's paying attention to. For instance, like, we're making all this fermented product. We're using, local microbes, realizing that has so much to do with the flavor.
That sourdough here in San Francisco
Right.
can't be made anywhere else.
But another thing is, it's dispelling notions. Like, if we take that sourdough, like the tartine sourdough,
Yeah.
we bring it over to Japan, over a 3-week period, it's not tartine sourdough anymore.
Yeah.
But it's still, the human idea is like, oh, this starter's from tartine, it's going to be delicious.
Right.
But it tastes nothing like tartine anymore. And so it's, creatively speaking, I think it's less about making exact dishes, because we have so many talented chefs and it's a team effort. And we got a great team that are making the dishes. And I feel that with the lab and if I'm going to exist, it's more about how can we create a new color or a new flavor to work with.
I'll sit in I'll be at the symphony and I'll be hanging out before the concert starts, and I'll just look around the room and I'll start breaking down every physical part of the room and thinking how it was made, and I'll just trace it in my head back to its manufacturing point. and I'll think about its root materials and all. It's like a relaxation technique I do. But I'll go to a restaurant and I'll bite into something and I'll think, and I'm a pretty good cook in my house. I have a good idea about taste, but I'll bite into something and think, I don't know anything about food. I just bit into this and I'm clearly a baby when it comes to the complexity that's going on here. Do you have, I just wonder, I don't know what it's like in your head when you see taste. Do you see them as physical elements you can plug together that some go together, some don't? Do you see them as color? Is it like a music composition?
I don't see it as that. I see it, I'm always struggling. What I see is how other people might see it.
You mean you can empathize with what someone else is going to take away from it?
Well, I try to think of some flavor ideas. Right now, the first thing that popped in my head when you brought up the whole concept of imagery and flavors, I thought of Pascal Barbeau, the chef at L'Estrance in Paris, and a dish he has. It's button mushrooms, which has a bad rap here, but in Paris they're so delicious. They're shaved very thinly and looks like a lemon meringue pie, and he's got a layer of foie gras that he cures in verjus, some salt, and he just slices these button mushrooms, layers the foie, some citrus, rind, usually yuzu, and then another layer of foie, button mushroom foie on a very thin tart. Cuts it. On the side, there's a little lemon puree, and on the other side, it's just a drizzle of hazelnut oil. And I asked Pascal, when I first ate it, I was like, oh, on top it's dusted with porcini powder. And it just looks beautiful. It looks just like a beautiful pie, fluffy pie. And when you eat it, that's when I was like, what? That's when I'm like, what's going on here? How is he doing this with the simplest of flavors? And when you eat a little bit of the lemon puree and a little bit of the hazelnut oil, then you realize like, this guy's been working on this dish in his head for years.
Wow.
And I asked Pascal, and he was like, oh, no. Of course he has. Like, it just doesn't happen by accident. Or actually, it should. It happens by accident. And I think that...
But it's an accident you prepared yourself for.
Right. And it's a series of accidents. There's no genius chef. There's nobody that's just like born out of the womb, they can do it. Like, I think you have to sort of, like a scientist, just continue to make mistake after mistake after mistake and keep track of that. And for someone like Pascal, he is just more brilliant at it than anyone else.
But doesn't that become a difficult thing when you're trying to open a bunch of restaurants to maintain an atmosphere where the mistakes can yield the accidents that yield the really exciting discoveries? Mistakes are still costly and difficult.
But that's what we want.
Yeah.
We're after the big mistake. And, in emails, I'm telling everybody, like, I don't care about the success. Please document the failure.
Right.
Like, because we have this round table thing where everyone emails finished dishes, and I'm just so tired of it. I'm like, okay, fine, I'm sure it tastes good. That doesn't tell us anything. I want to know the story in between the beginning and the end is really how we got there.
Right.
And that's the information that's going to benefit everybody.
It's the left side of the Cook's Illustrated recipes. It's the exciting part.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the mistakes that we're going to learn. If someone can make a mistake, then we can sort of avoid making the same mistake. But like anyone else, it's not just cooks. People don't like documenting failure.
I know.
I think that flavor actually comes from failure.
I totally, there's no project. I just built something out of copper like last week. And like everything, when I'm into a build, when I'm excited about it, somewhere around 60, 70% of the way in, I think, I have no idea what's going on. I really hope this works out because this could also go totally pear-shaped right now. And I learned that about myself about 15 years ago, that would happen in everything that I did. And I'm prepared for it, but it's still always shocking to be in that state.
It's unnerving. But I think that as we're getting larger, it's like, how do we sort of become the anti-corporation or anti-restaurant within the anti-corporation? And I think by doing that it's embracing inefficiencies. I don't want us to become an efficient restaurant.
I see.
Because that's bad, I think. That means like it's very easy to come up with a flavor. It's like, we wind up being like, we're going to do a trio of Wagyu sliders with 3 different kinds of ketchup and whatever. Like that is like trying to, the lowest hanging fruit type of thing. That's the efficiency that we don't want.
Yeah.
I want somebody that's going to try to make a dish or struggle for it, and it might take a much longer time, but you're going to create a more beautiful, more delicious, more memorable dish by sort of making mistakes along the way. And that's hard to foster. It's really hard.
I can totally imagine. People, we say the only difference between science and screwing around is writing it down.
Yes.
And most of the time, you only have failures to write down.
I know. It was crazy. Like somebody forced me to read Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto.
Isn't that great?
Blew my hair back. I was like, oh my God. The whole concept is, for me, it's like people hate writing stuff down. But like it's only to promote communication.
Right.
There's never enough communication going on in the kitchen. Never.
Yeah.
And for instance, this is my new like baseline. If I have a cook in the kitchen and I ask other chefs this, it's like how long, and let's just say the floor is dirty and it continues to get dirty throughout the hour. It starts clean at minute 0 and then progressively gets dirtier. Nobody tells a cook when to clean it up. At what point do you think the cook's going to take it upon himself to clean up the floor? Sort of like an SAT question,
right.
But the reality is, I think it's not a matter of when they're going to clean it up. It's going to be about 6 to 9 months. They're going to learn, oh, that's my job. Even though I didn't make that mistake, I'm going to take accountability for it.
Right.
I'm going to clean up that mistake. So it's now like sort of installing like checklists or base guidelines where, hopefully it's not the minimum, but we're going to clean up certain things. Things have to be standardized.
Did you read Atul Gawande's piece on the Cheesecake Factory?
I loved it.
It blew me away.
Blew me away. And that's why I was like, Cheesecake Factory, like, that really, I read that piece, and at the same time I was in Seattle for a week.
Did you go? I still haven't been. I've been wanting to go.
I have been. And you know what? At the end of the day, people can talk as much shit as they want. People think that the Cheesecake Factory makes great food, and it makes people happy.
Yeah.
You can't
argue with that.
No, and they make all the food in-house with the exception of the desserts.
Locally sourced, et cetera.
It's great. And
they have an efficiency of like 95%.
They do it better than anybody else. And, Seattle's got all of these great restaurants, great produce, and all these restaurants are semi-busy. And my hotel's next to the Cheesecake Factory. I'm there all week. Every night there's a queue out the door. I'm just like, they got to be doing something right.
Yeah.
And to the end, most people, they consider Cheesecake Factory like their favorite dining experience. I'm not going to tell them that's wrong.
Right.
And to me, that's actually the new challenge. It's
But you've always been a fan of the high-low.
Yeah, the high-low, but it's more difficult to please the masses or more people that want to spend $15 to $20 on dinner. Or Cheesecake Factory is relatively expensive. I'd say for the majority of the Cheesecake Factory customers, that it's one of their like higher end dining options. If you're giving me, if someone's going to come in, like for a restaurant in Sydney, it's like $175. And with wine, tip, it's like $400 a person. If we can't make good food and we're only doing like 30 covers a night, like something's wrong with us. It takes a certain, obviously a skill set and some talented people, but for the most part, like the advantage is on us.
Right.
And I really am tired of getting patted on the back. And I'm not trying to be this Tiger Dave mentality, but it's a contract. You go to a restaurant, it's an unwritten contract. You're supposed to get good food.
And if you can command a restaurant where people come in and spend $400 per person, you absolutely should be able to.
Yeah, you should. I mean, our standards have gotten so low, or I don't know. It's like everybody wants to be congratulated. I was like, no, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's like a doctor. You save his life. Well, good. That's what you're supposed to do.
I'm always surprised when I'm in a place where it's a very high per person cost and one of the dishes is solidly mediocre. Like everything's great, but one of them just fell off a cliff, and you're like, "What happened?"
And you can't do it, and that's why it's more shocking when it happens. But I think the more difficult challenge is something what the Cheesecake Factory does. They make everybody happy,
right?
Certainly, some of the recipes and the dishes you could criticize, but our job as chefs or restaurant owners, again, it's making delicious food. The delicious food is a byproduct of the end goal, which is making your customer very happy.
Do you end up you try everything that all of your restaurants makes? You have a hand in each of the dishes?
Yes, I'm trying. It's hard now because sometimes like there's stuff going on in Sydney, and I have to like get back, and by the time I get back to Sydney now, it's off the menu. So
And you can't possibly, I mean, with some ingredients, you can't just make it here and hope that it's the same there.
no. In Toronto, it's again, the way I'm looking at it is they're the offensive coordinator
Yeah.
and they're calling the plays.
Yeah.
And I have to make that sort of imprint in my mind or I will go crazy.
Right, yeah.
So,
So when you say you've been concentrating on fermenting everything, is there a specific flavor that no one's paying attention to that's rocking your world right now?
I don't know rocking the world, but I feel like I've picked up this cross as my mind to bear is this whole concept on MSG, glutamic acid.
Yeah.
That is really one of the huge byproducts of fermentation, and the more I delve into, and I feel like I'm a broken record talking about MSG, I just feel that it's gotten one of the worst raps. And if we're going to scrutinize MSG, every ingredient should be scrutinized. And
So why does MSG have a bad rap right now?
people feel that it's bad for you. It causes headaches, sweating, heart palpitations, just overall bad for your health. And in reality, every study that's ever been done to prove that MSG is bad for you has actually proven the reverse, that it's actually not harmful for you. If you eat, the 300 grams dosage where it's going to be harmful for you,
Right.
it's a salt. If you do that table salt, you're going to bad things are going to happen, or sugar, or whatever. It's a glutamic acid. Our bodies produce it. You can't be allergic to it, or your body wouldn't function.
Right.
We need it to survive. It just so happens that when in the presence of food, it makes food more delicious.
Like a salt does, it's an enhancer.
It is an enhancer. The best way I can think about it right now is, if I gave you a dry-aged piece of beef that's been dry-aged for 80, 90 days, ribeye,
Yeah.
and then we have one that's been fresh, like from the slaughterhouse a week ago, which one do you want to eat?
I'm going to want the dry age.
Dry-aged, why?
I'm just going to think the flavor is going to be more complex. It's also, it's hit or miss with really fresh steaks.
Fresh steak, hit or miss. Are you buying it for the texture? Are you buying it you're buying it mainly for the flavor?
I like the ribeye's my favorite cut because it is the balance between those two things.
Right.
I like that soft texture of the marbled meat, and I like the flavor.
And the only reason you're dry aging it, so you're controlling the rotting process. And you're controlling the rotting process so the ribeye acts as a magnet to attract certain microbes and bacteria that are going to create an enzymatic action to change some of the proteins and into glutamic acid. You're basically, all you're doing, you're not trying to make it more juicy. You're actually removing juice from
Right.
it. What you're trying to do is harness glutamic acid.
Wow.
So then I have to ask the question is, okay, why don't I measure the amount of glutamic acid that is now increased in that ribeye? And would it be so wrong to inject a fresh ribeye with that same amount of glutamic acid?
Right.
And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's not the question.
You're
It's
just
like,
trying it out.
why not?
Yeah. It's like those guys who've been doing, I just was reading about this. One of the reasons you put whiskey in oak casks is because as the weather changes, it absorbs and leaches in and gets all this taste from the cask itself. And there's some guys who figured out that you can do that really quickly with a vacuum chamber. And you can use pressure and vacuum to actually rapidly accelerate that process to make something like a 20-year-old scotch in a couple of weeks or a few weeks.
That's exactly the point. But nobody's going to talk shit about trying to make scotch faster.
Right. But
They're definitely going to talk shit about glutamic acid and MSG because it's a pariah. And it goes back to 67, 68, Robert Kwok, doctor, wrote a letter to New England Journal of Medicine saying him and his friends happen to have these symptoms when they eat Chinese food, get headaches, nauseous, whatever. And it was in the editorial section.
Wow.
It never was documented as a scientific study. It just became common knowledge that that's Chinese restaurant syndrome. I think you tie that in with the 60s and the immigration and the 70s of Chinese to America. One of the reasons why I feel Chinese food, at least in New York for the most part, or probably America in general, why it's not as good as, say, Canada, Australia, or China for that matter, is they were probably like computer programmers or accountants in China. But they come here, the only job they could have was opening a Chinese restaurant.
Right.
It is also where MSG makes food. It does make food taste better. And they don't know how to operate a restaurant. These aren't chefs. They're putting together food, and if it makes the food taste better, that's what we're going to do. So there probably was a convergence of, yes, too much MSG being used. It's also got a 3-letter acronym, which at the time was like DDT and all the other
Interesting
things.
Yes.
And I think that somebody on the Partridge Family, this guy Ian Crosby, he's a professor in Ontario. He wrote an awesome paper on it. He basically said one of the nail in the coffin was when somebody on the Partridge Family was in the hospital, and like all the reporters like, "What? Why are you there?" He's like, I got sick eating Chinese food." So it just became this cultural
almost mass hysteria.
Yeah, and the reality is people eat MSG all the time, artificially. Doritos. On the label.
Yeah.
You like those Dorito Loco tacos? Well, you know why? It's got MSG in it. And for me, it took more of a personal approach when people come into the restaurant and happen and they're like, oh, just make sure you don't put MSG in the food. And I'm like, fuck you. Like, I want to, if I can get my cooks to understand the science of it to the point where if you assume we put MSG in the food, what we're going to say was like, if you think that we put MSG in our food, please assume that we do, or something along those lines.
Right.
So,
well, I loved you have a warning at Momofuku, which is something like, this is just not a place for vegetarians.
yeah, just make your life easier.
Yeah, let's be clear. Nothing doesn't have meat in it.
Everything in this menu has meat product in it, even the vegetarian options.
Are you thinking about putting a thing in that helps educate people about MSG in the menu?
It's really hard because I'm having an uphill battle even convincing our own cooks, because at the end of the day, it's a salt.
Right.
The way we can use it in our food is it's a glutamic acid with the sodium molecule, and that's how we can disperse it.
And you can buy it and shake it out.
Yeah,
right?
It's an accent. It's in different types of seasoning salts. I think in moderation, it's great.
So if I take a small piece of meat and I put salt on one and MSG on the other, am I going to detect
salts.
a distinct difference?
You're going to feel that there's a meatier, more delicious element on the MSG.
Wow.
And that's why I'm asking, why don't we use it as a finishing salt?
Yeah.
So the other knock on it, besides the health and the cultural, misgivings or misunderstandings of it, is the fact that it's cheating.
Right.
If you're cooking with MSG, it's cheating.
Then
You're
you might
not
as well
taking
give
a
up
shortcuts. Right. So my question is, if we make everything from scratch, let's just say we're making the ramen and I raise the pigs myself, I slaughter the pigs, make the pork product, make the soup from scratch, I make the wheat, I harvest the wheat, I make my own noodles, everything's from scratch. Obviously this is a hypothetical situation, and I take it all the way and I just finish the last soup with a couple sprinkles of MSG. Is that cheating now? Is that taking a shortcut? If our goal as chefs is, again, to make the most delicious food possible, and this is proven to make food more delicious, and it's present in a variety of food products from tomatoes, Parmesan, soy sauce, miso, tomato paste, whatever, it's endless. Am I doing something wrong? And again, this is an outlier of a hypothetical idea or question, but it answers the question, like, why not then? Why are we not using it? That's the question that we should be asking.
Right.
And nobody's given me a good reason, except that people are like, I don't think we should do it, chef.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, you know, even when we cook here, we'll like go through all the steps of the recipe and realize we need a ton of salt and lemon or whatever it takes at the end to finish and get that taste up. Right.
I mean, I had this person. I gave a talk on MSG at the last year's Mad Festival, and you know, I've learned this is the scientific jargon. You never say it's conclusive. You say all data suggests. All
Yes,
data suggests
absolutely.
that MSG is not harmful for you. Certainly, if a study comes in and says it's the worst thing you can eat, yes. But until that happens,
Then you say most
no.
of the data suggests.
And this Dutch chef or reporter comes up to me, and he was so agitated after I gave this, you know, mumbled talk about MSG. He's like, you can't talk about this. Because I guess that in Holland, they must have done some campaign against MSG. Causes brain tumors, and the study was like, kids gain like 20 kilos. And I was like, let's take a look at the study. The amount of MSG that they were using was insane. Yeah. And then the study was like, there were kids eating hot French fries, like coated MSG. Like maybe it was the fact that they're eating a whole bag of hot chips and not
maybe that has something to do. Yeah. There's a New Yorker comic from years ago of two rats in adjacent cages, and one of them says to the other, "I'm doing okay. I'm down to 150 packs a day."
Yeah.
So where do you have a vision of where the Momofuku group ends up? Do you I mean, clearly you're moving in a direction, but do you have an idea about how you want to conquer the world?
You know, all I know is, again, the end goal, and how are we going to reverse engineer from that. I want all of the cooks to sort of, right now minimum wage in New York is like still like $10 an hour.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed. When I started cooking in New York, it was like $9.50.
Yeah.
You cannot live on that.
No.
You know, that's like after taxes, $300, $400 a week.
Yeah.
It would be great if we can get Momofuku to the point where we can pay our cooks well above to like $20, $25, even $30 an hour.
Yeah.
That to me is when I know we're doing it right.
So you're not only training a generation of cooks and chefs, but you're allowing them the freedom to...
Right. And if one of these projects that we're working on, let's just say it's the misos, and like that's making a lot of money, we can use that to sort of offset, you know, the other things that we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's how I know is, you know, it's not about getting larger. It's about how can we improve the restaurant? How can we make everybody happier creatively, financially, and for our customers as well?
Is there somebody whose model you really admire?
Bill Belichick?
Yeah.
Makes no sense with football. No, I joke that, but like in terms of a restaurant, I don't know. All I know is that's my goal. Like the first goal for Momofuku was literally, if we ever get enough time to make family meal, like that'll be like the tops. I can't believe it, because we're just opening, we're struggling so much. And I remember literally buying pizza or Popeyes every other day, and it was so depressing because family meal is so important to me. Because if you can make that and make it delicious, like everything, that's like that's the cornerstone of a restaurant.
Wait, what do you mean the family meal?
The staff meal.
The staff meal,
yeah.
copy, okay.
And that was like literally my first goal. Like as far as I wanted to take Momofuku like 10 years ago, it was like, it was so out of the distance. Like trying to make staff meal or family meal was such an impossible concept.
Wow.
Because like we just didn't have enough time. I was like, no way, this is never going to happen. And then you forget about it because you're already doing it, and you're like, oh man, like that happened. Somehow along the way it happened. And then like year one or year two was like, I want to make sure everyone gets health care. If we get to that point, that means we're doing well. That happens. And then the next point is like, well, if we can do this and this and this. So each step along the way, it wasn't like, oh, we got to open up all these restaurants. We got to do this. Like, we didn't want to Peter Meehan and I, we didn't want to do a magazine. It was because it was sort of like a joke. Not even just a joke. It was like, well, this is an opportunity to do something interesting. We didn't plan on ever continuing it. And sort of that it's a mixture of having fun while taking it very seriously and challenging ourselves with sort of unrealistic goals and hoping that we meet them. But you know, if we meet them more often than I don't know. That's sort of where I'm at right now. How do I justify getting bigger? Can we make everybody's lives better that works within Momofuku
It sounds
and our
like you're building
farmers
a
and
family.
stuff. Very much,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Or I'll just go crazy, which I already am. But
Do you have a fantasy of your retirement years? I picture myself in a university college town teaching advanced problem solving somewhere 3 times a week, riding my motorcycle there because my kids will have moved off to college and I could finally ride a motorcycle again. That's my fantasy there. But do you have something like that in your head?
I just want to be fishing.
Really?
Yeah, I love fly fishing. It's one of the few things I can do where in the middle of it, I won't think about work at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite place you go?
I really like Wyoming and Idaho side. Montana is great. Basically the Rockies in America. There's all sorts of things I want to do. I want to learn how to spay cast. I want to learn how to do all these other things.
Do you tie your own flies?
I just don't have the patience for. I can't do that. And I just lose too many. It would kill me.
When I grew up in New York in Tarrytown, and I used to ride the Metro North into New York all the time. And at one point I was living back with my parents, and I would ride in the mornings, and there was a guy who would sit at the table, and he had a little fly tying vise, and he would tie flies all the way into New York every morning.
Wow, that's a good way to kill your day.
Yeah.
Or at least travel. But fly fishing is what I would like to do somehow.
How often do you get to do it?
Probably twice a year. So that's one of the benefits of being in Australia. New Zealand's close by, and it has arguably some of the finest trout fishing in the world. It's like hunting for trout. There's like only 2 things introduced to. New Zealand's just an amazing place. On a totally side note, I'm not being paid by Ajinomoto. I'm not being paid by a New Zealand, Board of Tourism. It's an amazing place.
What's so amazing?
There's nothing.
I've heard that
in
from
Australia.
everybody.
Everything can kill you.
Right.
Everything. From the undertow to the jellyfish to the spiders to the sun, everything can kill you. New Zealand, nothing. There's nothing. It's totally harmless. There's no spiders. There's not even poison ivy.
Really?
Yeah.
I was just saying that the other day. I feel like you go to, I've never been to Australia, but I work with a lot of Australians, and every story they have is like, oh yeah, we've got these lovely vipers, and they can fucking kill you. We've got this, platypus can fucking kill you, and like every story they had has that.
Because it's true, and they're just.
David, thank you so much for talking.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Adam.